This is where Apple should really be concerned. Literally, by the definition, an app developer is a customer of Apple's App Store. Privacy is a nothing burger, okay? There's really nothing there. Going on this thread of platforms do compete with producers, and really that is the vulnerability of where are the lines of competing with producers and your suppliers. And if you want to talk antitrust, if you want to talk about actually being able to break up the tech monopolies, which is obviously kind of the big holy grail of threat to these companies, the only way that those claims have actually worked out is if you can show that you are putting the customer at a disadvantage. And when you look at the producer being a customer, which is true. So what's interesting about Apple, just maybe a month or two ago, the Supreme Court ruled that Apple's contracts were actually violating antitrust law with their app developers, because what Apple was doing was having the money go from the customer to Apple. Apple takes its cut, its 30% cut, and then gives the money to the app developer. And as a result of that, since the money wasn't going from consumer to app developer, and then Apple takes its cut after the fact, the argument was made that the consumers, the people that own phones and are buying apps, are disadvantaged because Apple is essentially passing on a 30% fee that the consumer is having to pay for. And that kind of set off a bunch of alerts from the antitrust standpoint. Now, the dissenting opinion, it was a 5-4 ruling on the Supreme Court. The dissenting opinion, written by Neil Gorsuch, basically said that this case is basically inconsequential. All Apple needs to do is rewrite its contracts with its app developers, stating that the money is going to go from the consumer directly to the developer, and then Apple can take its 30% cut after the fact from the developer, as opposed to being the literal middleman from the flow of money. All that means is it's not any antitrust judgment. That antitrust judgment isn't going to stick on Apple, and rightly so. But this is where Apple should really be concerned about, okay? Because what this story is about is how Apple uses its app store to copy the best ideas. And there's a story in here about this app called Clue. A popular app women use to track their periods has risen to the near top of Apple's health and fitness category. And now basically Apple's health app has copied a lot of those features. I don't think this specific example is Apple really doing anything wrong. Look, that's the reason we have patents. And if Clue has something that they could patent, then they can enforce that in a court of law, and they could say, hey, Apple, we patented this and you can't copy it. But otherwise, it's fair game. And that's just the way the world of software works, right? You make an innovation in your app and I copy it and improve upon it a little bit. And it's literally exactly what Facebook did via Instagram to Snapchat. So Snapchat had stories long before Instagram had stories. And now Instagram stories are arguably way more popular than Snapchat stories. But Snapchat didn't try to sue Instagram or Facebook because they knew they would never win that lawsuit. So this is not something that's going to bring Apple specifically into antitrust crosshairs. However, the stuff that we have spoken about in prior episodes where, say, Apple favors Apple Music and gives Apple Music preferential treatment or access to APIs on the iPhone much sooner than, say, Spotify, right? Or access to the Apple Watch much faster than Spotify. It's when you start to see the platform favor its own apps that are in direct competition with their producers, their third-party suppliers, basically. And then that's really where I think you can make an argument to say the platform is competing unfairly, and that is detrimental to competition, and that ultimately is raising prices on the customer. The customer in this case being the app developer, not the consumer, not the user of the iPhone. But if you just take into account how Apple now needs to change its flow of money, who is paying Apple 30%? It's now the app developer. So literally, by the definition, an app developer is a customer of Apple's App Store. And with the way antitrust law is written is to say that if the customer is put at a disadvantage by the monopoly because of their size and scale and lock-in power and all these things, then you can violate antitrust law. And so riddle me that, right? If the app developers are customers because they're paying the 30% fee to Apple, and there are now many, many stories much more aggressive or tangible than this story. I actually don't think this story is the meatiest one that's out there. There are other ones that we've spoken about, like Spotify and others. Those stories, and I think Spotify has sued Apple maybe in the spring. And so those things should concern Apple. It's the same thing that Google, if you look at what the Yelp CEO and the CEO of TripAdvisor, both platform companies, Yelp and TripAdvisor, there are countless stories about other websites saying, and these are producers, right, that Google is competing unfairly and for these kinds of reasons. And this is where antitrust law and the existing antitrust precedent that's been around for 50 years is perfectly fine to be used to make the argument that platforms at the tech monopoly scale can stifle competition. Now, that's a real concern, and no one really focuses on that today. All they focus on is this privacy stuff. Privacy is a nothing burger, okay? There's really no big threat here. Hi, this is Alex Mozed. Thanks for joining us on Winner Take All. If you enjoyed the content today, which I bet you did, please comment, subscribe, and definitely message me on Twitter when we're doing live streams. Also, please note, all opinions expressed about stocks or public companies on the show are exactly that, opinions. This is not investment advice. Don't act on it. WisdomTree licensed Applico's Platform Insights data product to aid in the creation of the PLAT ETF. Thanks for joining us.